This really was a thorough and comprehensive look at how the Blue Death affected Montana at this time. And I just really appreciate the variety of stories. And we got to see the images, we got to hear from family members, we got to see how it affected people in a variety of different ways, from the fear, the sheer fear, the loss of language and traditional lessons, the horrors of babies orphaned and dead family members, no safety net like we had during our pandemic. And I really appreciate that it immersed us into the environment visually as well, the landscape, the sounds of Montana. And we got to hear, yeah, the music, the voices of the past ringing through, and ensured that we were set in the time and had a good understanding of it. I loved getting to travel through these times through the individual journeys, such as Rose Gordon, Mary Frances, the Finnish grandfather who lost his sister and wife, and the children need to be up for adoption. These kind of stories are the stories that need to be preserved and carried forward, especially with the Blackfeet people and the sweep of influenza through them, where it is integral to your culture and opening it up for 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 non-traditional medicine to intervene. It was just a very powerful doc and really well compiled.
The peak thing that I took away from this documentary, I really liked the emphasis on um, the different ethnic group that it affected. So, you have the African American population, which was a very interesting one to talk about, where they're moving west to avoid the racism of the South. But even as this flu was going on, and as they could be there to help and whatnot and volunteer their services, people still didn't want their help. Stuff like that. It was just very upsetting and interesting to watch. Um, Also, when it comes to the native population, how they'd gone through the smallpox and now having to live through this new Spanish flu from these white people that didn't ask to be there, it's annoying. And seeing how, despite all these obstacles, like, these ethnic groups, uh, were trying to basically overcome this white society and show that they could not fit in, but are just as smart or just as capable. And seeing how, even in an instance where more people are needed to help and they want to help, like their race has somehow made it so that they cannot help. It was a very interesting thing to watch. And knowing something as severe as the flu and like being selective on who can help is just very interesting.
This is a pandemic that we don't really hear about in school. I hadn't learned a ton about this pandemic. I think it's, brushed over as we learn about World War I and II, but it was such a huge event in US history and we don't know much about it. So this documentary was super cool to learn about, especially on the tails of the COVID-19 pandemic that we had. I was especially struck by how similar the two pandemics were, in that they had very similar regulations, with the taking away of chairs and tables from bars, the shutting down of public places, the pushback that some people had. It really was history repeating itself, which was pretty amazing to me to see that. Also, just the older pictures of the people in masks, just looking so similar to how life was in 2020. I loved all of the old pictures and footage that this documentary provided, and also the many perspectives that it shared with us from so many different people in this era experiencing the same pandemic in a lot of different ways because they were such different people. From children, a child's perspective to the Blackfeet people, to Rose, a Black woman living in the time, helping out in the pandemic as a nurse, Hazel Yoder, a young woman who passed away eventually, but was also a nurse in the influenza. Just so many different people experiencing this pandemic and how they handled it, and to hear their writings and their perspective and their children's perspectives on these issues on this pandemic was super cool, just to see so many different people talking on it.
Documentary felt very reminiscent to the mainstream documentaries that you would maybe find on Netflix, that created this eye-opening sense for young individuals who could possibly contract and fall ill to the flu. I love how this documentary takes us back to the prior years, showing us what could have been the reasons for the Blue Death in the first place, and sort of providing a great reason and theory as to what and how it's happened in the first place. So well done.
And I love learning about these stories where real life events and their very real and palpable impact on specific groups of people, it's normally or especially relevant where those stories are normally invisible in the broader scheme of things and history books specifically. A story of overcoming obstacles that should not exist in the first place, but we have indigenous testimonials and lots of memorabilia and imagery of these old times. It is so cute to discover how things were done 2 centuries ago and the reenactments and beautiful music all across. 6 people of Montana give us their experience of living through the devastating influenza pandemic, and it is just a beautiful homage of what they had to go through and how we have learned from that, or not.